Her name was Sarah, and the number felt more like a sentence than a celebration. 8 years, 325 days. 8 years since I looked into those bright, hopeful eyes and swore forever. We built a life, a home, Liam, our son, wild and full of dirt, and Maisie, our daughter, 6 years old, with eyes like Sarah's and a stubborn streak all her own. Before the I-do's, before the cribs and the sleepless nights, we talked. Really talked. Parenting. How we wanted to raise independent thinkers, kids who questioned, who respected. Balance, we called it. Structure, freedom. Seemed simple then. Sitting on that sun-drenched porch, dreaming of the future. God, I was a fool. It started subtly, like a creeping vine, beautiful at first, then choking the life out of everything it touched. Sarah's mom, Patricia, my mother-in-law, she was a force, a constant buzz in the background. Co-sleeping. That was the first battlefield. We'd agreed on sleep training, gentle but firm. Patricia was a different story. Babies need their mothers, Daniel. It's instinct. Her voice, saccharine sweet, held a steel edge. Every whimper from Maisie's crib was a personal assault, a glare that burned through me. Are you sure you want to let her cry? She'd try to sneak into Maisie's room at night, like a goddamn ninja, her shadow falling across the hallway. I'd catch her, her hand hovering over the crib rail, just checking on her, Daniel, but her eyes screamed something else. Guilt! Judgment. I tried to brush it off, overbearing grandma syndrome, I told myself. But it didn't stop. It just mutated. The kids grew, and with them, Patricia's influence. A constant stream of opinions, disguised as helpful advice. Food, clothes, hobbies. Everything was subject to her scrutiny. Sarah would just nod, smile, appease. She means well, Daniel, but it wasn't advice. It was direction. My direction, ignored. One weekend, Maisie came back from an ice cream trip with her grandparents clutching a miniature Bible, humming a children's hymn. 3 years old, my daughter, barely able to tie her shoes, reciting scripture. Church, Daddy. Grandma says it's very important. I felt the blood drain from my face. We'd talked about this, Sarah and I. No religion. Let them choose when they were old enough to understand. Just exposure, Daniel. They're sharing their values. Sarah's voice was too casual, too dismissive. It was the first real crack in the wall we'd built, and a cold wind was blowing through. That was the first time I felt like an outsider, a guest in my own home, watching someone else write the rules. But it wasn't the last. The years blurred, a relentless assault on my sanity. Patricia and her husband, Robert, became a permanent fixture. They had a key. Sarah gave it to them without even asking. Their opinions were gospel. Liam couldn't play with trucks, they were too rough. Maisie needed ballet, not karate. More feminine, dear. I'd say no, but it was useless. They'd find a way around me, always, and Sarah let them. They just want to help, Daniel. They love the kids. I tried talking to her, begging her to see what was happening. It's disrespectful, Sarah. To me, to us. She'd deflect, minimize. You're overreacting, Daniel. The first started feeling like I was losing my mind. Invisible walls were closing in, suffocating me. My own house felt like enemy territory. Then came the bomb. I overheard Patricia talking to Maisie in the kitchen. You don't have to listen to Daddy, sweetheart. Mommy knows best. It was a punch to the gut. Pure, unadulterated poison. I confronted Patricia. She just smiled. A smug, knowing smile. Don't be silly, Daniel. You're taking it the wrong way. Later, I brought it up with Sarah, expecting something. Support. Anger. Anything but. They're just trying to help, Daniel. Calm down. Another gut punch. A betrayal. Then I discovered they were still taking the kids to church. Behind my back. Again. I found a frilly princess dress in Maisie's closet. after I'd specifically told them no. We were trying to encourage her individuality, not force her into a pink-clad stereotype. Maisie started repeating things. Grandma says you're too strict, Daddy. Grandma says Mommy understands. They were actively undermining me, turning my own children against me. I felt like a ghost in my own life, a background character while Patricia and Robert called the shots. Every boundary I tried to set was met with excuses, justifications, outright denial. Was I wrong? Was I crazy? Was I overreacting? Or was my entire family being stolen from me, piece by piece? This couldn't go on. I waited until the kids were asleep, then cornered Sarah in the living room. I laid it all out, calm but firm. The undermining, the secret trips to church, the princess dress, the whispering campaigns. Maisie is repeating things, Sarah. Your mother is turning her against me. Sarah sighed, leaned back on the couch, crossed her arms. I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this, Daniel. They're just trying to help. I value their opinions. They have experience. Do you trust me, Sarah? That caught her off guard. Of course, I trust you. Then why are you letting them dictate how we raise our kids? We made decisions together, Sarah. Decisions they're ignoring. I brought up Patricia's comment to Maisie, the one about not listening to me. I mentioned the church. Sarah rolled her eyes. It's just exposure, Daniel. They can decide for themselves later. Would you be okay with my parents taking them to religious events behind your back? Her expression hardened, but she didn't answer. The conversation was a brick wall. Every boundary I pointed out, she excused. They just love the kids, Daniel. It's not that serious. It is serious, Sarah. If we don't set boundaries, it's only going to get worse. She looked annoyed, but before she could say anything, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, hesitated, then answered. Patricia. I sat there, watching her face tighten, her voice grow hushed. Then, she handed me the phone. Patricia launched into a tirade about family values, accusing me of creating division, of being controlling, of shutting them out. I hadn't even spoken to them. Sarah must have told them everything the second she got the chance. Decisions about my kids are between me and my wife, Patricia, not you. You're being hostile, Daniel. The call ended and we sat in silence. You're blowing things out of proportion, Daniel. That was it. I snapped. This isn't up for debate anymore, Sarah. We are setting boundaries. The kids are not going to church without both of us agreeing. Your parents are not making decisions about our parenting. If you aren't going to stand up to them, I will. She stared at me like I'd just insulted the queen. The next day, Patricia and Robert were at our door. Sarah let them in before I could even say a word. They sat down, acting like they owned the goddamn place. Robert cleared his throat. Sarah's very lucky to have parents who care so much, Daniel. I'm not going to tolerate you overriding my decisions anymore, I said, my voice tight with barely suppressed rage. Patricia clutched her chest, feigning a heart attack. How could you do this to your own mother, Sarah? Robert shook his head, a silent display of disappointment. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, but didn't say a word. Patricia started crying, a performance worthy of an Oscar. I never thought my own daughter would turn her back on family. I just want what's best for the kids, Daniel. You're being so unfair. Robert finally spoke up, his voice low and controlled. He understood my perspective, he said, but I was trying to cut them out of Sarah's life, controlling her, making her choose. I looked at Sarah, begging her with my eyes to say something, to stand up for our family, for me. But she just sat there, silent. You are not taking the kids to church without our permission, I repeated, my voice trembling. Patricia wiped her tears, sniffled. If that's what you really want. But her voice was dripping with insincerity. They left, and I turned to Sarah. Do you understand now? She nodded, but said nothing. For a few days, things were calmer. No surprise visits, no unwanted help. Sarah wasn't happy, but at least she was respecting the boundary. Or so I thought. A week later, Maisie mentioned church again. When did you go, honey? Last Sunday. We asked Mommy, and she said okay. I turned to Sarah, my heart sinking. The kids really wanted to go, Daniel. I didn't see the harm in letting them. That was when I realized she wasn't just letting them get away with it. She was letting them win. She was actively choosing them over me. A few days later, Maisie was playing with her dolls. Out of nowhere, she started talking about Grandma. Mommy and Grandma talk about you a lot when you're not home, Daddy. What did they talk about, honey? She shrugged. Just stuff. About how you get mad over little things. I didn't push. She's 6! But it was enough. That night, I started paying more attention to Sarah's phone calls. She'd step into the other room, lowering her voice. I couldn't hear much, but one night, I caught something that froze me to the bone. You can't let him control everything. That was Patricia's voice. Sarah's response was too quiet to hear. The next morning, I started noticing more things. Organic snacks in the pantry, something Sarah never cared about before. Maisie signed up for ballet, even though we'd agreed she'd continue with karate. Liam's favorite dinosaur pajamas were missing, replaced with bland, neutral-colored ones. What happened to Liam's pajamas, Sarah? She shrugged. He'll get used to them. It was all adding up. Patricia was still calling the shots, orchestrating everything from behind the scenes. Why didn't you tell me you took them to church, Sarah? Why are you constantly going behind my back? She rolled her eyes. You're overreacting, Daniel. You're being paranoid. Later that night, Maisie hesitated before hugging me goodnight. What's wrong, honey? She looked down at the floor. I don't want you and Mommy to fight. I didn't know what to say. That was when I decided I needed proof. The next day, while Sarah was out, I installed a home security system, something I'd been considering for a while, but now it was a necessity. I focused on the entrances, ensuring I wasn't violating any privacy laws. It didn't take long to get my answer. Within days, the footage showed Patricia sneaking in, confirming my worst fears. It took less than a week to get my answer. One afternoon, I checked the footage during a break at work. There she was, Patricia unlocking the front door and stepping inside like she owned the place. She was in and out within 15 minutes. That night, after the kids were in bed, I went through their backpacks. Inside Maisie's bag, I found a church pamphlet and a small religious pendant. In Liam's, a brand new set of clothes, tags still on, ones I never approved of. The next morning, I went through the footage again. Patricia had snuck in 2 more times while I was at work. I confronted Sarah that night. I know your mother has been in the house, Sarah. I know she's still making decisions about our kids without my input. Sarah's face turned red. She stammered, then asked, How do you know? I told her about the security cameras. She went silent. I walked over to the kids' bags, pulled out the church pamphlet and pendant, placed them on the table. How did these get here, Sarah? She looked at them but didn't say a word. Then I told her what Maisie had said about Patricia telling her that Mommy will always listen to Grandma, but Daddy doesn't have to know. That's when she cracked. She sat down, rubbed her temples, and finally admitted it. She didn't know how to say no to her parents. She didn't want to disappoint them. She felt stuck. I don't care about your excuses anymore, Sarah. You have 2 options. Either you set real boundaries or I will. She didn't answer right away. That told me everything I needed to know. After the confrontation, Sarah apologized. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't exactly heartfelt. But she said the words. She understood why I was upset. She didn't mean to hurt me. She wasn't trying to go behind my back. But then she quickly followed it up with how she didn't want to cut off her parents. That was never the issue. I never asked her to cut them off. I asked her to set boundaries. So I made things crystal clear. No more unsupervised visits. No more religious exposure without mutual agreement. No more making decisions without discussing them first. If we were going to raise these kids together, we needed to act like a team. She nodded, agreed, but something about the way she said it made me pause. It felt like she was saying what I wanted to hear, not what she actually believed. I didn't have to wait long for confirmation. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a long text from Patricia. It was a rant, accusing me of ruining their family dynamic. She said I was controlling, that Sarah was miserable, that I was forcing her to choose between her husband and her parents. I ignored it. The next morning, Maisie was sitting at the kitchen table, eating cereal. Casually, she mentioned something that made me stop in my tracks. "We saw Grandma and Grandpa yesterday. We had cake at the coffee shop." "What do you mean, Maisie?" She happily explained that Mom had taken them to see Grandma and Grandpa while I was at work. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat with it. That night, I asked Sarah if she had taken the kids to see her parents. She hesitated before admitting it. She said it was just coffee, that it wasn't a big deal. She hadn't told me because she knew I would make a scene. I reminded her that we had just talked about this. She promised no unsupervised visits. I wasn't banning her parents from seeing the kids. I just wanted to be involved in these decisions. She brushed it off, said I was being paranoid, overreacting. A few days later, I overheard Maisie playing with her dolls. One of them was Daddy, and the other was Grandma. "Daddy, you're too strict." "Mommy is sad because of you." "Where did you hear that, honey?" She looked up. Grandma said so. The pattern was clear. Patricia was actively turning my kids against me. That night, I checked our joint bank account. Something didn't sit right with me. Sure enough, I found several transactions that didn't add up. A few hundred here, a few hundred there, money sent directly to her parents. I confronted Sarah about it, and she admitted she had been helping them financially. That night, I moved my paycheck to a separate account. I wasn't going to let them drain our finances behind my back. They weren't struggling, they didn't need financial help. When I confronted her about it, she said she just wanted to help them out. I asked why she never mentioned it, why she was sneaking around. She called me controlling. I knew I needed a second opinion. I reached out to Ben, a close friend who had been through a rough divorce. When I explained everything, he didn't sugarcoat it. He told me this was a massive red flag, that she was putting her parents before our marriage, before our family, that it wouldn't stop here. Couples therapy, Daniel? If she isn't going to listen to you, maybe she'll listen to a professional, she agreed. But during our first session, she spent most of the time defending her parents. She insisted they weren't trying to control her, that I was just taking things too personally. The therapist didn't buy it. At the end of the session, she looked Sarah in the eye and said, "If you can't set healthy boundaries, it will permanently damage your marriage." Sarah nodded, said she understood, but she never promised to change. That was when I realized something. If she was lying about coffee meetings and money, what else was she keeping from me? I wasn't sure how much more I could take. Something changed after the therapy session. Sarah started acting different. She was suddenly overly nice to me, offering to cook my favorite meals, asking about my day, making an effort to be affectionate. At first, I wanted to believe it meant she had finally taken the therapist's advice seriously, but something about it felt off. It wasn't real change. It was overcompensation. A few days later, she brought up a family dinner at our parents' house. Patricia and Robert had invited us over, and she really wanted us to go. She played it off as a casual gathering, just a nice evening with family. I wasn't interested. After everything that had happened, I didn't see the point. She pushed, said it would look bad if we didn't go, said her parents wanted to move forward. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I should have stayed home. The moment we arrived, I knew I had walked into a setup. Patricia and Robert were already seated at the dining table, waiting. No warm greetings, no small talk. The second we sat down, they went straight into it. Patricia started first, talking about how family should stick together, how she was worried about my hostile attitude. Robert chimed in, asking why I was trying to separate Sarah from her parents. Sarah just sat there, silent. "I'm not here to argue," I said, my voice tight. "My parenting decisions aren't up for discussion." Then Patricia dropped the bombshell. She announced to Daniel that she had pressured Sarah into signing the enrollment papers to send their children to the same school as her grandchildren, without consulting him. The tuition had already been paid, and Sarah admitted she felt forced into it. I turned to Sarah, and for the first time, she looked genuinely nervous. Maisie, sitting at the table, looked up at me, confused. She had no idea what was happening. How is this even possible? How could you enroll her in a school without my consent? That's when Sarah finally spoke. I already signed the paperwork, Daniel. Patricia smiled, satisfied. It's done. I didn't explode. I didn't yell. I just looked at Sarah, waiting for her to say something, anything that would make this make sense. She broke down crying. I couldn't say no to them, Daniel. They had already made all the arrangements and I felt pressured. It was the ultimate betrayal. She had made a major life decision for our child without even telling me. I stood up from the table, grabbed Maisie's hand, and told Liam to follow me. Sarah called after me, but I didn't stop. I walked out of that house, and I didn't look back. That night, I ignored her calls and texts. Patricia, however, had no problem reaching out. She sent a message, smug and confident. You can't fight us on this, Daniel. We already took care of everything. That was the moment I knew this wasn't about parenting disagreements anymore. Sarah wasn't just struggling to set boundaries. She was actively choosing her parents over our marriage, over our family. The next morning, I booked an appointment with a lawyer. I needed to understand my rights regarding custody, because at this point, I wasn't sure there was anything left to save. The morning after walking out of my in-laws' house, I sat in my lawyer's office. I laid everything out: the church incident, the secret meetings, the school enrollment, the princess dress, the dinosaur pajamas, the organic snacks, everything. He barely looked surprised. He had seen cases like this before. He confirmed what I already suspected. Sarah had no right to enroll Maisie in a school without my consent. It was a major decision that required both parents' agreement. The paperwork wouldn't hold up if I challenged it legally. But then he gave me a warning. If I didn't act fast, my in-laws would keep pushing until they erased my authority completely. If I let this slide, what would be next? Medical decisions? Where we lived? I had a choice to make. That night, I sat Sarah down. No arguments, no distractions. Just the truth. If you can't commit to putting our family first, Sarah, I'm done. I won't spend my life being a second-class parent in my own home. She panicked, apologized, said she never meant for things to get this bad, that she was just trying to keep everyone happy. There's no middle ground anymore, Sarah. You either set hard boundaries with your parents or I'm gone. She didn't give me an answer. 2 days later, CPS showed up. Again! Another anonymous report. My lawyer warned me that if this kept happening, it could impact the custody case. It was clear Patricia wasn't just trying to interfere anymore. She was trying to destroy my credibility as a parent. I documented everything, preparing for whatever came next. The caseworker asked to come in. I had nothing to hide, so I let them. They checked the kids' rooms, asked us both a series of questions, and even spoke privately with Maisie. The process took a few hours, but eventually, they ruled the report as unfounded. However, the caseworker warned me that repeated reports, baseless or not, could still impact custody proceedings. I asked if I could know who filed the complaint. They couldn't give me a name, but they hinted that it was someone concerned about family tensions. It wasn't hard to figure out. Later that day, I called Sarah while she was at her parents' house and told her what had happened. Instead of being furious with them, she defended them, said they were just worried and probably overreacted. That was it for me. I called my lawyer and told him to move forward with securing my parental rights legally. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for the next time they decided to pull something. When Sarah came home and saw the legal paperwork, she finally seemed to realize how far this had gone. She broke down crying, saying she never wanted things to end up like this. This isn't about what you want anymore, Sarah. This is about protecting my kids. That same night, I started making plans to separate our finances. I didn't know where this was going, but I wasn't going to let my in-laws have control over anything that belonged to me. The next morning, I got a call from an unexpected person, Robert. For the first time since all of this started, he apologized. He said he thought Patricia had gone too far, that he didn't agree with what she did. But then he said something that stuck with me. You know she's never going to change, right? I think he was talking about Patricia, but honestly, I wasn't sure if he meant Sarah too. A few days later, Sarah came to me, pleading for another chance. She swore she'd set real boundaries. She said she'd cut back contact with Patricia, go back to therapy, do whatever it took. But how was I supposed to trust her now? I told her I needed space. For the first time in years, I put myself first. I took the kids and stayed with Ben for a few days to clear my head. Because now I had to face the biggest question of all. Was there even anything left to save? After taking a few days away with the kids, I went back home to start organizing everything for the custody case. My lawyer had advised me to gather as much documentation as possible, texts, emails, financial records, anything that showed Sarah's pattern of letting her parents override our parenting decisions. While going through our home office, sorting through paperwork, I found something that made my stomach drop, an open email thread between Sarah and her parents. It wasn't just about everyday family matters. It was a full-blown discussion about modifying custody arrangements in case of a divorce. I started reading the emails and went back months. Patricia had been actively advising Sarah on how to position herself if we ever split. She had outlined strategies, keeping detailed notes of arguments, documenting my strict parenting style, and even collecting witnesses who could vouch for my supposed controlling behavior. There was one email from Patricia that stood out. If you do this right, Sarah, the court will see you as the stable parent. He'll have no choice but to accept limited visitation. It hit me like a truck. This wasn't just meddling. This wasn't just boundary pushing. Patricia had been preparing for this battle long before I even realized one was coming. And Sarah, she had never mentioned any of this to me. I printed everything, every email, every message. Then I packed a bag, grabbed the kids, and left to stay at my brother Tom's house. My lawyer's reaction was immediate. This changes everything, Daniel. If Patricia has been planning this for months, you need to act before they can make a move. He advised me to file for temporary custody immediately. That night, Patricia started blowing up my phone. At first, it was just messages demanding to know where I was. Then the threats started. You can't just take them and leave. You'll regret this. If you try to fight this, we will fight back. I blocked her number. The next day, my lawyer filed the emergency custody motion. He explained that, given the evidence, Patricia's clear intent to manipulate custody and Sarah's willingness to go along with it, I had a strong case. Hours later, Sarah hired a high-powered attorney, one paid for by Patricia. They filed a motion claiming I was emotionally abusive. The court ordered a temporary investigation, meaning I had to undergo a psychological evaluation and multiple interviews before any decisions were made. The accusations weren't taken lightly, and I knew I had a fight ahead of me. The first court hearing came fast. The judge reviewed both sides and made an initial ruling, temporary joint custody. That meant neither of us could make major decisions without the other's agreement. Patricia's plan to railroad me had failed, at least for now. That's when Patricia really lost it. Within days, she started spreading rumors to our extended family. Suddenly, I was being painted as unstable and dangerous. She told people I had anger issues, that Sarah had been scared of me for years, that I was controlling and manipulative. I ignored it until I got my hands on the texts. A distant relative, someone who didn't fully buy into Patricia's lies, leaked a series of messages Patricia had sent to Sarah. Patricia had been coaching her, telling her to document moments where I lost my temper, even if nothing happened. If he raises his voice, write it down. If he gets frustrated, take a picture. If he walks away from an argument, make it seem like he's abandoning his responsibilities. She had been setting this up for months. When I brought the texts to my lawyer, he barely looked surprised. This was textbook manipulation. The only thing working in my favor was that Sarah hadn't followed through with it. There were no records, no false reports, nothing that could actually hold up in court. But she still refused to cut off Patricia. The next court step was a custody evaluation. The judge ordered a psychologist to assess both parents, determining who provided the most stable environment. This is where everything started falling apart for Patricia. The evaluator saw right through the situation. During Sarah's session, her dependency on her mother became painfully clear. She struggled to answer questions about making decisions without her parents' involvement. Patricia didn't help herself either. She couldn't stop interfering. She kept inserting herself, even trying to contact the evaluator directly to explain the situation. That backfired instantly. Then came the game changer. Robert testified against Patricia. Before testifying, Robert asked to speak privately with me. He admitted he had always been uncomfortable with how much control Patricia had over our lives, but he was too afraid to stand up to her. In court, he finally told the truth. Patricia had pressured Sarah into decisions, manipulated custody discussions, and had no respect for my role as a father. He looked exhausted, like a man who had finally had enough. Then my lawyer presented the security footage, the videos of Patricia sneaking into our house while I was at work. By this point, Sarah had no defense left. Under pressure, she finally admitted that she felt obligated to listen to her mother and that she had difficulty making parenting decisions without Patricia's approval. It was the final nail in the coffin. But Patricia had one last trick up her sleeve. The night before the final custody hearing, CPS showed up. Another anonymous complaint. Another fake allegation about an unsafe home environment. This time, I was prepared. I welcomed them in, showed them everything, explained the situation. Within an hour, the social worker dismissed the case. No evidence, no concerns, nothing. The next morning, we went to court for the final ruling. The judge did not hold back. I was granted primary custody of both kids. Sarah got visitation rights, but with one strict condition: her parents could never have unsupervised contact. That was it. Patricia was cut off. As soon as the judge read the decision, Patricia lost it. She screamed in the courtroom, calling it a travesty of justice. Security had to escort her out as she shouted threats about how I stole her grandchildren. I didn't even look at her. Sarah just sat there, stunned. She had finally realized it. Her mother had just cost her custody of her own children. After weeks of tension, Sarah finally showed signs of regret. I noticed small changes. She hesitated before answering her mother's calls. She stopped making excuses for them. But it wasn't until after the custody ruling that she finally broke down. She admitted she had been afraid to go against them, but by the time she realized how much damage had been done, it was too late. She admitted everything: how she let her mother manipulate her, how she should have set boundaries, how she saw too late what it had cost her. She said she would finally go to therapy. She promised she would cut off her mother for good. I listened. Then I told her the truth. She could do whatever she wanted, but I wasn't taking that risk again. My kids had already been put in the middle of her family's toxic dynamic once. I wasn't letting it happen a second time. She sobbed, but there was nothing left to say. The next day, Patricia made one last attempt. She showed up at my new home, pounding on the door, begging to talk. She said she just wanted to fix things, that she wanted to be a family again. I didn't open the door. I called my lawyer instead. Within the week, I filed for a restraining order against Patricia. My lawyer warned me it could take time. Judges don't grant them lightly without strong evidence. However, after presenting the false CPS reports, her interference in custody matters, and the threatening messages, the judge ruled in my favor. It was a relief, but I knew she wasn't going to back down that easily. With Patricia finally cut off, Sarah spiraled. Without her mother pulling the strings, she struggled to function. She missed visitation twice in a row, too emotionally wrecked to see the kids. Meanwhile, the kids were thriving. For the first time, Maisie wasn't walking on eggshells, torn between listening to me or her grandmother. She became happier, more confident, Liam 2. The weight of Patricia's control was finally gone. Tom moved in temporarily to help out, and we settled into a new, stable routine. A few months later, the divorce was finalized. The court upheld the custody arrangement, primary custody for me, supervised visits for Sarah. By then, Sarah had finally done what she should have done years ago. She cut ties with Patricia. But it was too late. She had already lost me. Patricia's smear campaign had backfired spectacularly. People in her own extended family started distancing themselves from her, realizing how toxic she really was. She lost everything. A year later, things looked completely different. I had moved on. I was dating someone new, someone who respected boundaries, someone who understood what it meant to be a real partner. The kids loved her. Life felt peaceful for the first time in years. At one of our supervised exchanges, Sarah finally said it. "If I had set boundaries sooner, Daniel, we might still be together." I didn't respond because I had no regrets. I fought for my kids, protected them from a toxic environment, and finally broke free from Patricia's control. And I wasn't looking back. The divorce papers were signed, the custody arrangement set in stone, the restraining order against Patricia airtight. Logically, it was over. Legally, I had won. But the scars ran deep. Trust was shattered, and the ghost of Patricia's manipulation lingered in every interaction with Sarah. The supervised visits were awkward. Sarah tried. I'll give her that. She brought the kids their favorite snacks, listened to their stories, even attempted to play with them. But I could see the strain in her eyes, the anxiety simmering beneath the surface. She was constantly looking over her shoulder, as if Patricia might materialize out of thin air. The kids, though outwardly happy, also seemed cautious around her. Maisie, especially, was hesitant to share her feelings, as if afraid of saying the wrong thing. I knew Patricia's poisonous words still echoed in her heart. Co-parenting felt less like a partnership and more like navigating a minefield. Every decision, no matter how small, felt fraught with potential conflict. What if Patricia was secretly whispering advice into Sarah's ear? What if she was subtly undermining my authority, even now? I found myself constantly second-guessing myself, wondering if I was being too harsh, too controlling. Was I turning into the very thing Patricia had accused me of being? The therapist assured me I wasn't, but the doubt persisted. The weight of forgiveness was heavier than I expected. I wanted to forgive Sarah, to move on, to heal, but Patricia had poisoned the well. It wasn't just the lies, the secret meetings, the attempts to manipulate custody. It was the fundamental betrayal of our marriage, the willingness to prioritize her parents' desires over my needs, over our family. I tried to focus on the kids, on creating a stable and loving environment for them. But every time Sarah called, every time I saw her, I was reminded of what she had done. She started going to therapy, as she promised. She seemed to be making progress, acknowledging her codependency, setting boundaries with Patricia, but the damage was done. The bond we once shared was irrevocably broken. One evening, Sarah came over to pick up the kids after a visit. As she was leaving, she turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I know it's not enough, but I really am sorry." I just nodded, unable to speak. Part of me wanted to believe her, to offer her some comfort, but the wounds were too fresh, the pain too deep. As she walked away, I felt a pang of guilt. Was I being too hard on her? Was I holding on to the resentment too tightly? The therapist reminded me that forgiveness was a process, not an event, but I wasn't sure I was ready to begin that process. My relationship with Emily blossomed slowly, cautiously. I had met her through a mutual friend, and initially, I was wary of getting involved with anyone. The scars from my marriage were still too raw, but Emily was different. She was kind, compassionate, and fiercely independent. She listened without judgment, offered support without pressure. She understood the complexities of my situation, the lingering effects of Patricia's influence. Most importantly, she respected boundaries. She never pushed me to talk about things I wasn't ready to discuss. She never interfered in my co-parenting relationship with Sarah. She simply offered a safe space, a haven from the storm. The kids adored her. Maisie, especially, gravitated toward her warmth and gentle nature. Emily never tried to replace their mother. She simply offered a different kind of love, a different kind of support. One afternoon, I picked up the kids from school, and Emily was waiting for us. As we walked to the car, Maisie slipped her hand into Emily's, smiling up at her. That small gesture filled me with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Emily wasn't trying to take anything away from Sarah. She was simply adding to our lives, enriching our family in ways I never thought possible. I had hoped that Patricia would disappear from our lives, fading into the background like a bad dream. But she wasn't done yet. The restraining order kept her away from me, from the kids, but it didn't stop her from trying to manipulate the situation from afar. She started spreading rumors about Emily, accusing her of being a gold digger, a home wrecker, an unfit influence on the children. She tried to turn Sarah against her, painting her as a threat to their family. Sarah, to her credit, didn't take the bait. She had finally begun to see Patricia for who she truly was, a manipulative, controlling woman who was willing to destroy anything to get her way. But Patricia wasn't easily deterred. She started sending anonymous gifts to the kids, lavish presents designed to undermine my authority and win their affection. When I discovered the packages, I was furious. I called Sarah, demanding that she put a stop to it. She apologized, said she had no idea Patricia was doing this, and promised to talk to her. I didn't trust her. I knew Patricia wouldn't listen to Sarah, so I took matters into my own hands. I wrote Patricia a letter, a carefully worded but forceful message. "You are no longer a part of our lives," I wrote. "Stay away from my children. Stay away from my family. If you continue to interfere, I will take whatever legal action is necessary to protect them." I had no illusions that it would work, but I had to try. I had to protect my kids from her poison no matter the cost. The following week, I received a call from Maisie's school. She had gotten into a fight with another student. When I arrived, I found her sitting in the principal's office, her face red and swollen. "What happened, honey?" I asked, kneeling down beside her. She burst into tears. She said bad things about Mommy and Emily. The other student, it turned out, had been repeating rumors that Patricia had been spreading. Patricia had somehow gotten to the child's mother, poisoning her mind with lies about our family. I was furious. Patricia had crossed a line. She wasn't just trying to manipulate us anymore. She was actively harming our children. I wanted to confront her, to scream at her, to make her pay for what she had done, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. It would only escalate the situation, further traumatizing the kids. Instead, I sat down with Maisie and talked to her. I explained that some people spread lies and try to hurt others. I emphasized that those lies weren't true, and that Maisie shouldn't let them affect her. She was brave. We were strong. She was loved. I tucked her into bed that night and stayed until she fell asleep, her tiny hand gripping mine. This incident became a catalyst. I knew Patricia would not stop until she destroyed everything. I had to do something drastic. I decided to seek a more permanent solution. My lawyer informed me that, given Patricia's continued harassment and manipulation, I could pursue a permanent restraining order, one that would prevent her from contacting the kids or me in any way, even indirectly through third parties. The process was lengthy and emotionally draining. We had to gather evidence, build a case, and present it to a judge. Patricia, of course, fought back, claiming I was trying to isolate her from her grandchildren, denying her rights as a grandparent. But the evidence was overwhelming. The judge ruled in my favor, granting the permanent restraining order. It was a victory, but a hollow one. It was sad that it even had to come to this. What a complete waste. Finally, Patricia was out of our lives for good. Sarah began to find her feet as well. The kids were happier, more confident, more secure. The darkness that had clouded our lives for so long began to dissipate. But the experience had changed me. I was more cautious, more guarded, more aware of the potential for manipulation and control. It had also taught me the importance of boundaries, of standing up for what I believed in, of protecting those I loved. I began to rebuild my life, brick by brick. My relationship with Emily deepened, and we started to talk about the future. The kids adored her, and she them. One sunny afternoon, we were all sitting in the park, enjoying a picnic. Maisie and Liam were laughing and playing. Emily was reading a book, and I was watching them, my heart filled with gratitude. As I looked around, I realized that I had finally found peace. I had survived the storm, and I had emerged stronger and more resilient. I had created a new life, a new family, a new future, a future free from Patricia's control. Years passed. The kids grew up. Maisie was a creative, intelligent young woman with a passion for art. Liam, wild and adventurous, was determined to see the world. Sarah, after years of therapy, finally seemed to have broken free from Patricia's influence. She maintained a cordial relationship with the kids, respecting boundaries and offering them support. She and Emily were even friendly, a sign of the healing they had both achieved. Patricia, isolated and alone, remained a distant memory. She never apologized for what she had done, never acknowledged the pain she had caused, but she was no longer able to hurt us. One day, I received a letter from Robert. He was dying, he wrote, and he wanted to apologize for his role in Patricia's actions. He admitted that he had been weak, that he had allowed her to control him, that he should have stood up to her sooner. He asked for my forgiveness. I didn't hesitate. As I sat there, rereading his letter, I realized that I had finally come to terms with the past. I had forgiven Sarah, I had forgiven Robert, and I had even forgiven Patricia, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved to move on. I had built a new life, a life filled with love, laughter, and peace. I had protected my children from harm. I had broken free from the serpent in my Eden. And that, I realized, was all that mattered.